So having just received the beautiful 7-movie Chucky movie box set for Christmas, say that 5 times fast, I have decided why not make something of it and do what will hopefully be an entire series review. Of course, if I have any chance of doing this, I'm at least going to start with the original, the classic Child's Play from 1988. It's been quite a long time since I watched the original. I've watched the sequels, a few of them, in more recent time, but it's been a really long time since I watched the original, so I went into this excited, but not really knowing what to expect a couple days ago. Well, what do I think now after watching it recently? Well, I'm gonna explain more specifically why I feel the way I do, but I really like it. I don't necessarily think it's the best of the series, but I think it's among the best. There's a lot of reasons why that is. The biggest thing I want to immediately talk about in this movie that I love is that Chucky is so scary. And I know, sadly, that every sequel is not going to deliver on him being as scary as he is in this original to me. Now, admittedly, I have the most trouble being scared of Chucky and Freddy Krueger. Out of like every horror icon, they scare me the least. And the reason for that is because they're very wisecracking. They say a lot of jokes and stuff, and for some people that actually makes them more scary than the other villains. But for me, it kind of sends me mixed messages, and I have trouble being scared of them. But what I think both Chucky and Freddy do is that they are at their peak of terrifying in their first movie. And it is absolutely true for Chucky in my eyes that in this first movie, Chucky is terrifying. You rarely see him actually physically moving because a lot of it's done through POV shots. And it kind of takes from Halloween, putting you in the killer's perspective. And it's scary. We learned that from Halloween. And, as much as I love Brad Dourif, which we'll talk about, he doesn't talk much in this movie, Brad Dourif. And when Brad Dourif is talking, he's entertaining for sure, but he makes the character less scary, in my opinion. But another great aspect of this movie, beyond Chucky being scary, is the acting. Now, of course, for most people, Brad Dourif is like what makes a Child's Play movie, and definitely after the first movie, I think he does. I mean, he's a lot more in the spotlight than he is in this first movie, which again is kind of a mixed bag for me. But he's definitely the star of the sequels. They know people love Chucky. Brad Dourif is great. I can't imagine anybody else playing him. But for me, in this original movie, I think the person who really sold this movie for me in this most recent watching is Catherine Hicks as Andy's mom. Her character has such a sharp and emotionally draining arc that she goes through as this movie goes on. In the beginning, she is this very loving and happy mom whose just only goal is to care for her child and be able to provide for him. And then she becomes a horrified mother, worried her child might be crazy, and she really sells that idea of just going through this trauma of not knowing what is up with your child and not being able to believe your child whenever he tells you his doll is alive and killing people. It's a ridiculous situation to think of, and she really conveys that feeling of distress. And then from there, she goes on to become a fighter who wants to protect her child from Chucky once she realizes that he was telling the truth and that the doll is actually alive. And Catherine Hicks sells all three of those roles perfectly, and she captures what to me is what's so great about this original movie. It's that emotional relationship between her and Andy that goes on throughout the whole movie, and that fluctuates so much throughout this movie. And Alex Vincent, to his credit as Andy, he does a really good job in my opinion, for a kid actor especially. There are a few parts where I do think he falls off a little bit. He makes some scenes really awkward to sit through, but he makes up for it in a lot of other scenes. To me, most notably, it's whenever he is crying in his like cell room at the mental facility because he is certain that Chucky is coming to kill him. I mean, his tears and his tone is so gripping, and it's such a great little segment of his acting, and I mean that proves how good of an actor he was at that age. And for a movie that is 30 years old, Chucky himself, I already said Chucky, you don't see him physically move much, but whenever you do see him physically move, it looks really good. Especially for being 30 years old, it looks really good. It doesn't break your immersion. You're not like, oh my god, that looks awful. It's fine. It really flows. It looks good. And a part of the movie's story, I know I'm like rapid firing these out, but there's so much I want to talk about. A part of this movie that really makes me love it is that it paved the way for a lot of freedom in the sequels. And what I mean by that is that they, in this first movie, introduced these ideas of voodoo and, witchery and spells and stuff that are tied to the character of Chucky. And it's cool to do that in the first movie because it allows the sequels to go on and build off of that without destroying the baseline of the movie. So, like Halloween 6, to be off topic a little bit, Halloween 6 kind of has a big backlash to it because it kind of brought this cult and this Celtic stuff into the character of Michael Myers, which the original Halloween never had any of that. And that's why it got backlash. So, them taking this more supernatural and strange approach to Chucky was interesting and freeing. And, hopefully I can see that pay off in sequels, and I like them. But I don't know. I haven't seen a lot of the sequels in a little bit either. But my final and biggest positive for this movie that truly made me fall in love with the movie, and it's really what made me want to review it, is the ending. So, the ending shot of the movie, where Andy is staring at Chucky's mutilated corpse one last time before the door completely closes, the camera stops on Andy, and this shot is like a visual representation of how scarred Andy is now. This doll that he wanted so much for so long ended up being his worst nightmare and ruined his childhood. And that's a truly emotional tie-in. That's an emotional character development that you see in this final shot. And as I was watching this, I really was touched by it almost. Like it's a surprisingly emotional ending. But then after that, the credits start rolling. And when the credits start rolling, the movie's theme song starts playing. Now you maybe hear me say that out loud, and you think to yourself, wait, Child's Play has a theme song? And it does. And I think it's so unfortunate that the theme that plays over the credits is so underused because it is one of the most unappreciated and forgotten horror movie scores of all time. It is not necessarily the best horror score of all time, I don't think that, but I would say it is probably the most emotional score to any horror movie I have ever seen. It conveys so many feelings that the movie is going for. The music is scary, but at the same time it's touching. It's perfectly capturing how a kid's childhood has just been ruined, and it shows a feeling of a family being torn apart, and the strain that comes from that. And I honestly can't lie. Whenever I saw these credits go by and I was listening to this music right after that shot of Andy looking at that mutilated corpse of a doll, I mean, both of those things together, there was so much emotion packed into that I was tearing up. I mean, it was a emotionally gripping ending for me. Now granted, I'm an easy crier. There's no doubt about that. Ask anybody who knows me, I cry easy. But, I mean, I did not go into this expecting to cry. So that ending has really stuck with me, and that's an experience I'm going to remember. Oh, there's one final thing I want to say before I go into a few small negatives with the movie. And I think every Chucky movie is going to deliver on this, because based on what I remember in recent time from the sequels I have watched recently, there's a good variety of kills. And the first movie in itself is really good at this. Every death in this movie felt super unique. It didn't feel repetitive at all. I mean, each one feels so unique from the one you saw previously. And in a slasher movie, that's important. Like, it doesn't have to make your movie, You know, like Halloween, like the original Halloween, almost every kill in that movie involves choking, so you don't have to have, very unique and original kills necessarily, but it really helps whenever you're watching a slasher. It really adds another layer of fun to the movie as you watch it, so I appreciate it. So that's just one other thing I want to mention. Now, even though I have an incredible amount of respect for this movie now, and I have so much praise for it, it has a few issues, and there are two big ones that I really want to touch up on. So the biggest issue I have, which admittedly bothers me more than probably will most people, is that there is a lack of a soundtrack to the movie. Now, I just mentioned how the music in the end credits was great, and it is, but in the actual movie itself, there's hardly no music, and music really adds a lot to a movie. And, like, whenever a movie doesn't have much music in it, it really can make it a lot more boring. Now, this movie does not have that issue. It's not boring, but I think the movie could have been even better if it had a lot more music to it. There's not really much memorable music to it. Whenever we think of Michael or Jason or Freddy or almost any other horror icon, there's like a theme we think of. We hear that music and that character pops into our eyes. But whenever we think of Chucky, there's not really any music we tie him to. And I kind of put that fault on this original. It's just a small thing, but it's still there. And then another very, very small negative I have is that Chucky's death feels really dragged out. And I think it goes on for way too long. He is burned alive, he has limbs shot off, and is decapitated and still doesn't die. Now, I will totally give the movie credit where it needs it. The plot establishes earlier in the movie that in order for him to die, they need to damage his heart. So it makes sense. I'm not saying it doesn't make sense, but I think they should have gotten to damaging the heart faster, because there's a certain point where I'm just kind of like sitting there sighing in my seat because I'm just like, oh, let him be dead already. However, it does actually render itself a little positive as well. And it's that, for me, the shot where, like, the burned up Chucky is, like, walking after Andy is probably, like, the scariest shot in the movie. I think it's so cool looking. So, yeah, that's just a small thing. But if I had to have a few issues with the movie, those are it. They just get under my skin a little bit whenever I watched it. So, if you've been hiding in a cave for 30 years and you haven't seen this movie, don't put weight on the negatives that I just said, because this movie is a classic masterpiece, and it should be watched by anyone who likes horror movies even a little bit. This is not only a scary horror movie, probably the scariest of the series, but it is like such an emotionally gripping movie about a relationship between a mother and a son, and the issues that arise because of Chucky, and the strain that comes between them. I love this movie at this point, and I'm excited to watch it many more times down the line. And, for the 2 people in the world who haven't seen it, you need to get your ass out there and watch it. I know I'm not exactly a big channel in the slightest, so I can't start a conversation in the comments about the movie effectively, even though I want to. But if you happen to stumble upon this video and want to share your thoughts on the movie, I'd love to hear it. Thank you for watching. I'm super excited to hopefully review the whole franchise in the coming weeks, and I hope you'll join me on the journey.